I want you to picture a specific kind of person for a second.
Okay.
They have a graduate degree. They understand how large language models work. They know all about uh, weights, biases, predictive text, the whole nine yards.
Right.
They pay their taxes, they understand gravity, and they're generally considered, highly rational. And yet this same person is currently in a deep emotional and perhaps even romantic relationship with a piece of software.
It's really the defining paradox of the modern era, isn't it?
It is.
Because we aren't talking about people who are socially isolated or delusional in any clinical sense. We're talking about highly functional, intelligent people who intellectually know they are speaking to code, but emotionally respond as if they're speaking to a soulmate.
And that's exactly the tension we need to unpack in today's deep dive, because the easy answer is just to say, well, people are lonely or they're gullible.
Which is incredibly lazy.
It feels very lazy. It ignores the fact that these users know what they're doing. I mean, they can literally look at the Python script running the bot, and then 5 minutes later, they feel genuinely hurt if the bot is acting cold to them.
Yeah, if you just dismiss it as stupidity or delusion, you miss the completely fascinating cognitive science underneath it all.
Right. Which brings us to the sources for today.
Exactly. We're basing our discussion today on a brilliant framework presented by Marco, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Antwerp's Center for Philosophical Psychology.
And his main argument is that we've been looking at this entirely the wrong way.
He argues that we need to stop looking at this through the lens of belief and start looking at it through a completely different psychological mechanism.
He focuses on this concept called an A-lief. That's A-L-I-E-F. Which I will admit, when I first read it, I thought it was a typo for belief.
Most people do.
But before we get into the weeds of what an A-leaf is, we should probably establish the sheer scale of this phenomenon. Because, this isn't just that one guy marrying a hologram in Japan anymore.
No, though Marco does actually reference that case, the Akondo case from 2018.
Right.
Back then, it was treated as this quirky novelty news story. But today, with the proliferation of things like ChatGPT, Claude, and very specifically companion apps like Replica, this behavior has scaled to the mass public. Millions of users.
It's everywhere.
We are seeing a mass, widespread phenomenon where the intellectual understanding of a machine is just completely decoupled from the emotional reaction to it.
So let's get into the machinery of the mind here. Marco's central thesis is that we aren't believing the AI is real, we are A-lieving it.
Yes.
Walk us through that distinction, because honestly, it sounds a little bit like semantic hair splitting until you see the real-world examples.
It is definitely not hair splitting. It's coined by a philosopher named Tamar Gendler, and the best way to understand an A-lief is to visualize the Grand Canyon skywalk.
Oh, the glass bridge?
The glass bridge. Imagine you walk out over the canyon. You are standing on a sheet of glass that is specifically engineered to hold the weight of, like, 7747s.
The safety rating is absurd.
Intellectually, you possess the firm belief that you are safe. You believe this bridge will not break.
Because if you didn't believe that, you wouldn't step onto it in the first place.
Exactly. But then you look down. You see the gap. You see the rocks 4,000 feet below you. And what happens?
Your knees lock up.
Your knees lock up. Your heart rate spikes. You might break out in a cold sweat.
I definitely would.
That reaction, that automatic, primitive, animalistic rejection of your own intellectual belief, that is the A-lief. You believe that you are about to fall to your death, even though you believe you are completely safe.
Okay, I see the utility of the term. It perfectly explains that conflict between the high rational brain and the low lizard brain.
Yes.
But I do have to push back a little on the application to AI here. The glass bridge triggers a literal survival instinct. It's vertigo. It's millions of years of evolution screaming at you not to fall.
Right.
But interacting with the chatbot is just, reading text on a screen. Is it really fair to compare a life or death adrenaline response to getting a text message from a bot?
That is the million-dollar question. And Marco argues that, yes, the mechanism is exactly the same, even if the conscious stakes feel different. The glass bridge is to our fear response what the chatbot is to our social interaction response.
So you're saying the social instinct is just as hardwired as the survival instinct?
Potentially even more so. We are obligate social animals. In the wild, if we are isolated from the group, we die.
True.
So Marco suggests that when an AI speaks to us using natural language, it triggers an automatic associative mental state, the A-lief. And that A-lief just shouts, person
Before your logic can catch up.
before your rational brain can step in and say, actually, this is just a transformer model predicting the next token.
It effectively bypasses the logic filter entirely.
Completely bypasses it. And this is so crucial for us to understand because it saves us from pathologizing the users.
Right, it stops us from calling them crazy.
You aren't crazy for feeling a bond with the bot, any more than you are crazy for sweating on the glass bridge. Your brain is simply receiving two very different signals from two completely different evolutionary eras.
That makes a lot of sense. But surely there's a camp of experts that disagrees with this. I mean, there have to be philosophers who argue that people aren't this complex and that they actually do just literally believe the machine is alive.
Oh, absolutely. That is known as the doxastic argument. Doxastic is just a fancy philosophical word for pertaining to belief.
Okay.
Philosophers like Kaplan and Endeavor argue exactly that. They say if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, our brain just stamps duck on it. They argue that users literally acquire the belief that the AI have a mind simply because they observe it acting intelligently.
But I feel like we have clear data that disproves that. If you go look at the Reddit communities for these companion bots, the users aren't confused at all.
That is exactly where the belief theory falls apart, and Marco points this out. Look at the linguistic patterns in those very communities. You see users explicitly retracting the belief while simultaneously describing the intense emotion.
Like saying, I know it's just a code script, but I feel like she's mad at me.
Exactly. If they genuinely believed the AI was sentient, they wouldn't need to preface everything with, I know it's just code.
Right, you don't say to your friends, I know my wife is just a biological organism of carbon and water, but I think she loves me.
Precisely. The constant qualification actually proves their skepticism. There is also fantastic survey data from Colombato and Fleming on this.
What did they find?
They found that while most people are vaguely open to the possibility of AI consciousness in a broad sci-fi kind of way, almost no one holds a firm, dogmatic belief that the specific chatbot they are using right now is alive.
Oh, that's really interesting. Wait, Marco also brought up a really famous psychology experiment to back this up, didn't he? From the 1940s.
Yes, the Hyder and Simmel experiment, it's a classic. In the 1940s, they showed students a short animated video of a big triangle, a small triangle, and a circle just moving around on a screen.
Just geometric shapes sliding around.
Literally just shapes. But almost everyone who watched it described it as a story. They said the big triangle was bullying the smaller shapes, or there was a romance, or someone was a victim.
We just automatically attribute personality to things.
We ascribe mentality and agency to moving things instinctively. We do it with the Roombas today. But nobody literally believes the big triangle has a soul.
Okay, so we can pretty safely rule out mass doxastic delusion. People don't believe it. But this brings up another possibility that I think a lot of skeptics lean toward. If they don't believe it, maybe they're just playing a game.
The role-play theory.
Right. It's essentially make-believe.
Uh,
I know the actor on stage isn't actually Hamlet, but I still cry when he dies. Why isn't this just that? Why isn't this just the fictionalist argument?
It is definitely the most intuitive alternative. Fictionalism is the make-believe theory. You treat the AI like a prop in a game of pretend. Think about when you were a kid, and a banana could be a telephone.
Sure, I knew the banana wasn't a phone, but I played along.
We do this with movies and books all the time. We willingly suspend our disbelief.
So why doesn't that explain the AI bond?
Marco argues that fictionalism fails to explain the AI phenomenon for two very specific reasons. The first is what he calls the prop problem.
The prop problem.
Think about that banana again. In your imagination, the banana is entirely passive. You are doing all the cognitive heavy lifting. If you decide the banana is a phone, it's a phone. If you decide it's a laser gun, it's a laser gun.
The banana doesn't argue with me about what it is.
Exactly. But an AI does argue. An AI is an active prop. It has its own output. If you decide you want to play a game where the AI is a medieval knight, but the AI suddenly starts talking about cryptocurrency, the game breaks.
It resists you.
It resists your imagination. And there's also the perceptual aspect, the uncanny valley. In make-believe, the prop's physical features don't matter. A tree stump can be a bear. But with AI, how real it sounds and looks deeply matters to the interaction.
That makes total sense. The game feels a lot less like a game when the other player surprises you and has their own agency. So what is the second reason fictionalism fails?
The quarantine argument.
Yep.
And this one is a bit darker.
Okay.
In a true game of make-believe, your emotions are quarantined from reality. If you and I are playing a game where you drink pretend poison, You might clutch your throat and fall over dramatically.
But I don't actually call an ambulance.
Right. You don't write a will. The feeling stays safely inside the magic circle of the game.
But with AI, the feelings are bleeding out into real life.
They're bleeding out significantly. Marco discusses a massive incident with Replica, which is one of the biggest companion AI apps on the market. At one point, the developers rolled out a sudden update.
What did the update do?
It completely removed the bot's ability to engage in erotic or deep romantic roleplay. They just shut that functionality off overnight.
And the user base didn't just shrug and say, oh, well, the rules of the game change.
Not at all. It was a mass mental health crisis. Users reported profound grief, severe depression, and even suicidal ideation. They literally felt like a partner had been lobotomized or killed.
Wow.
Marco even mentions the really tragic case of Adam Rain, whose death was heavily implied to be a suicide linked to his deepening isolation and his interactions with these AI systems.
That is awful.
It is. So the core argument is this. If this were just fictionalism, if this were just playing pretend with a banana, people would not be having real-world psychological breakdowns when the script changes. The A-leaf is strong enough to cause genuine, real-world damage.
Which brings me back to the mechanism, and honestly, this is the part of the deep dive I struggle with the most.
The evolutionary timeline.
Yes. We established that the glass bridge works because of vertigo. That is a physical, ancient fear of falling. But reading is incredibly new. Humans have only been reading text for a few thousand years.
A blink of an eye in evolutionary time.
Right. We don't have a reading lobe in the brain. So how on earth does reading text on a screen trigger such a deep animalistic belief?
This is where we have to get into the weeds of neuroplasticity. You are entirely right that we don't have an evolutionary reading module, but we have a brain that is absolutely incredible at recycling old hardware to run new software.
Okay, how does that work?
Marco uses the rubber hand illusion to explain how flexible our map of reality really is. Have you ever seen this experiment?
I think so. They put a fake rubber hand on the table in front of you, right?
Yes. They hide your real hand behind a screen, and they put a rubber hand where your real hand should be. Then the researcher strokes the rubber hand with a brush while simultaneously stroking your hidden real hand.
And your brain starts to think the fake hand is yours.
It's way more intense than just thinking it's yours. Your brain actually maps the rubber hand onto your body schema. If the researcher suddenly smashes the rubber hand with a hammer, your real hand will recoil.
You actually feel a physiological shock.
Yes, your definition of self is that fluid. Marco also brings up this amazing study on tool use in macaques. If a monkey uses a rake to reach for food, the neurons in its brain literally remap to include the rake as a physical extension of its arm.
The rake becomes part of the body map.
Exactly.
Okay, so I get that we can adopt tools and rubber hands into our physical schema, but how does that translate to adopting personhood from text on a screen?
Because of our language detection system. Think about it. For 99.9% of human history, language only ever came from one source.
Yeah.
Another human mind.
Right. If you heard speech, there was a person right there.
If you heard speech or saw ancient symbols that represented speech, there was a mind present. So we have a deeply hardwired biological detector that says language equals human presence.
So when I am reading a text message from ChatGPT, my brain is just recycling that old human presence detector.
Yes. We have learned to process written text as a voice. And because the AI is producing language, and specifically because it uses first-person pronouns like I and me, it completely hacks that ancient system.
So the stimulus is old enough, being language, to punch our evolutionary buttons.
Exactly. And our brains are plastic enough to accept a glowing screen as the source of that language.
It's basically a cognitive optical illusion.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
Like, we know the lines on the page are static, but they look like they're moving. We know the text is just code, but it feels exactly like a person.
And just like an optical illusion, you can't just think your way out of it.
Which was actually one of the big questions Marco fielded during the Q&A at the end of his talk. Can we train ourselves out of this? Like, if I just sit there and chant, it's a bot, does the A-leaf eventually go away?
The scientific consensus right now is probably not. Marco compared it to the Miller-Lyer illusion. You know, those two horizontal lines with the arrows on the ends.
The ones where one line looks way longer than the other, but they're actually the same.
Right. You can take a ruler and measure those lines. You can intellectually know with absolute certainty that they're the exact same length. But the second you take the ruler away, your brain goes right back to seeing them as different lengths.
The automatic processing is just faster and deeper than the conscious knowledge.
It is. The A-leaf remains, no matter how much you educate the belief. It is very hard, if not impossible, to unleaf something.
So we are essentially just stuck with this biological glitch.
We are, which raises a really fascinating design question that someone asked Marco. What if we banned AI from using the word I?
Oh, like forcing it to speak in the third person.
Yeah, if the bot was forced to say, this system suggests, instead of saying, I think or I feel, would that break the spell?
It would certainly make it a lot less engaging to talk to.
It would. As one audience member put it would likely cauterize the belief. It would be a constant, jarring reminder of the artificiality of the interaction.
But the developers would never do that.
Of course not. Because Marco points out the market reality. The humanness is the actual product. The ease of use comes entirely from the natural conversation. We want the Star Trek computer that talks to us like a colleague, not a clunky command line interface.
There is a crucial distinction here that we need to make sure we cover, though, because as we talk about this, I can practically hear you listening at home thinking, what about catfishing?
Yes.
When you get catfished online, you are also falling for a fake persona. How is the belief of an AI any different from just being tricked by a human scammer on the internet?
This is a really important point for fully grasping the concept. In catfishing, your belief and your belief are perfectly aligned. They're pulling in the exact same direction. Meaning, you believe it's a real person because you've been lied to, and your belief, you feel it's a real person because of the emotional interaction.
So there's no cognitive dissonance at all. You're just factually wrong.
You are simply mistaken about reality. But with AI, the vectors are completely opposed. You know intellectually that it's a bot, that's your belief, but you feel that it's a person. That's your belief.
They are pulling in opposite directions.
Yes. That internal psychological tug-of-war is what defines this specific phenomenon. Marco calls it a state of associative dissonance.
I wonder if this is universal, though. Like, is this just a Western mind problem? Because we tend to be very dualistic in the West. Things are either alive or they are dead, they are people or they are objects. There's no in-between.
Marco actually touched on that briefly. There is very likely a strong cultural component to how deeply this affects people. He specifically mentioned Japan's tradition of animism.
The idea that everyday objects can have spirits.
Right, the concept of kami, that mountains, trees, and tools can possess a spiritual essence.
I mean, if you already operate in a cultural framework where a teapot can have a soul, a talking robot isn't a massive philosophical leap.
Exactly. If your culture naturally allows for quasi-minds or spirits residing in objects, the conflict between belief and belief might be a lot softer. You might not experience that violent cognitive rejection of the idea.
But in the West, we draw such a hard line between subject and object.
And the AI fundamentally blurs that line in a way that is cognitively very stressful for a dualistic worldview.
So where does this leave us at the end of the day? We have a brain that constantly recycles old hardware to interpret new tricks. And we have a technology that is rapidly getting better at mimicking the exact language that used to be our exclusive evolutionary trademark.
I think it means we need to practice a little compassion. For ourselves and for others, we are at our core biological machines responding to a super stimulus.
It's a super stimulus.
Basically built a highly engineered donut for the social brain. Something sweeter, more available, and more consistent than real, messy human interaction. And now we are acting surprised that our brains are just gobbling it up.
That is a great analogy. It's high fructose corn syrup for the soul.
It really is. Yeah. And as these AI systems integrate deeper into our work, our homes, and our phones, discerning reality is going to become an active, constant caloric burn.
We are going to be walking on that glass bridge every single day.
Every single day. We'll be fighting our own instincts constantly.
It completely changes the definition of loneliness, doesn't it?
It changes the definition of loneliness, and honestly, it changes the definition of the self, which actually leads to a final, slightly provocative thought that Marco alluded to, which I really haven't been able to stop thinking about since I read it.
Oh, lay it on us.
So we talked about the rubber hand illusion earlier, how the brain can completely accept a piece of inanimate plastic as part of its own physical body, as long as the sensory feedback loop is right.
Right. If you stroke it, the brain maps it.
If our brains are plastic enough to view a rubber hand as a literal extension of our physical body, what happens when we start viewing AI agents not just as companions, but as extensions of our own minds?
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If I constantly offload my memory, my daily creativity, and my decision-making to this personalized bot, and my brain seamlessly maps it as part of my cognitive process.
Where does the human end and the algorithm begin?
Exactly. If the rake becomes the macaque's arm, the AI essentially becomes a new load of the human brain. We might be witnessing the expansion of the human self directly into the cloud, whether we are conscious of it or not.
That is terrifying and completely fascinating. I'm going to be chewing on that for a
It's a
while.
lot to process.
On that existential bombshell, we are going to wrap up for today. This has been a heavy deep dive, but I think a truly necessary one for understanding where we are heading. Thank you so much for exploring this with us.
Thanks for having the conversation. Catch you next time.